The whole film is actually about a guy that really needs a hug.
Oh, you remembered that?
What elements did you focus on when animating to bring these emotional themes to life effectively?
Well, we had essentially two main characters, which is the boy who has the adventure, Michael, and Kensuke, the guy who's on the island. And as you say, he's the guy that needs a hug. So we deliberately made him very reserved from another time. He was a soldier, and therefore he had a very rigid discipline. And he was from a culture from the 1940s that was very reserved. And as you saw in the film, he couldn't even bear to bring a hug to his own son before he left for the army. With the two of them, we tried to make a contrast between Michael, who's young and quite rounded and has had a luxurious life, and Kensuke, who's been living on an island and who is old and who is a bit bony and a bit muscular. So physically, we tried to design the two characters so they're very different. A young, rounded boy and a very sharp, pointed Kensuke. And in the acting as well, we tried to make him very enigmatic so that his expressions weren't extreme, whereas Michael, we tried to make him more emotional. So it was a contrast between the shapes of the characters and the actual design of the characters. We tried to keep the animals looking quite naturalistic, as we were saying, and Stella must look like an actual dog. But at the same time, you can do little tricks with the ears. You know, when she's alert, her ears perk up or something like that. And we could just push the smiles of the orangutans to make them look slightly more emotional. But with Kensuke, we tried to keep him looking very, very, very still and very enigmatic, and you couldn't quite see what he was thinking. And we did that with just tiny, tiny little movements of the eyes. If he was thinking, he might change his eye direction or just frown just a little bit, whereas Michael, being an 11-year-old boy, would be much more emotional. But all the time we were very careful about how the characters were looking at each other and where they were looking, and if Michael was looking to Stella for reassurance when he first meets Kensuke. Stella has a good relationship with Kensuke, and Michael is very suspicious of him, and he was always looking to Stella to reassure him that Kensuke is a safe person to be with. We tried to keep it subtle, but at the same time, as I say, the contrast between Michael, who's an 11-year-old boy and very enthusiastic and smiling lots, or it's easy to see when he's smiling or afraid or happy, whereas Kensuke, we're never quite sure what he's thinking. Such as when he makes the decision to tell Michael that his parents are coming on the boat. Initially, he has a moment where he looks at all the beautiful times he's had with Michael on the island, and he doesn't want Michael to leave. And all he has to do is sort of look at the pictures and then look sadly down at the ground and leave his stick and decide that he's not going to tell Michael. And then in a moment, he just frowns again and he picks up the stick and he decides, no, I must tell him that his parents are here. The biggest challenge was finding animators who are good at both humans and animals. I'm not particularly good at drawing animals, I prefer humans, but some animators are really lovers of animals. So we tried to give all the orangutan work and the Stella work, the dog work, to these animators, because it's quite complicated to move a character with 4 legs. And of course the orangutans as well, we had to make them quite naturalistic, but at the same time we wanted to make them so that they had emotions. And we tried to have that balance between something that could exist, but at the same time we wanted to sense if they're happy or they're sad. I met with the animators every day for about 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, and then every morning I talked to the directors and we went through each scene to see if they were happy with it or not. So the directors first briefed me on what emotions they wanted from the characters, and then I fed that to the animators. I helped them technically achieve that, and I would do draw-overs for them and sometimes reanimate parts of the scene. And then I would present it to the directors, who would give a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
You have a lot of islands and natural environments, and how did you get inspired for this part?
Somebody asked a question if we actually went to the island to research it, but of course it was during the time of COVID. And of course we don't have a Disney budget either. But we were inspired by a number of films, I think mainly Steven Spielberg films, actually, the director. But there was an old film called The Swiss Family Robinson, which was a Disney film. in the 1950s, which had a beautiful tree house. And they had this family that was stranded on a desert island, and all of the tree house, you had a roof that opened to show the stars, and you had running water and showers. They tried to make the jungle as realistic as possible, and they tried to make it initially a very savage place. Initially, you just see cliffs, sharp cliffs, and mist and fog, and eventually you get the warmth of the island and the lush scenery and the fruit and the trees and the beautiful tree house. And then you get the danger when the poachers come. So we were just trying to capture the emotions of the island, the hostility of the island, and then the warmth of the island. And just trying to keep it as natural as possible. But we could push the realism just a little bit more with the animation, because in reality, it wouldn't be possible to build a house that far in the treetops. It was slightly stylized, but still we tried to give the jungle its own identity.
It's always challenging to animate water. How did you manage that?
It was a mixture of computer-generated water and splash effects done by hand. So a lot of the stuff that you see when the tide comes in and out, that's all animated by hand. And when you see the dolphins jumping out of the water, all of the splashes are animated by hand as well. Or when Michael is diving for rocks. But when you see big bodies of water, like the big wave that washes Michael off the boat, most of that is computer-generated water, because it interacts with the boat, and the boat is 3D as well. So you have to keep the sort of two elements together.
Was this the most challenging part of this process of animation or other?
Yeah, it was one of the most challenging, I think, because with the schedule, it was very, very late in the day, so there wasn't a lot of time to get it right. Initially, we were going to actually use real water for the film and real environments and little bonsai trees. But because of COVID, we couldn't do that because people couldn't work in the same environment. So we ended up doing classic background paintings. But it's always very, very difficult to get elements to match. So you've got a 2D hand-drawn person on a computer-generated boat with computer-generated water. So that is very complicated, as you say, to get it looking right.
How did you align your visions of animation?
If I'm working on a commercial, for example, it's usually for 3 or 4 weeks. So it's very intense and very quick and very high-pressured. Whereas something like a 1.5 hour film, you can't do the animation in less than a year. So, but what's nice about it is you get the time to really develop the characters, and the animators have the luxury of working with one character for over a year instead of just for a few weeks. So you get the depth of the character and the consistency of the character, and you get wrapped up in the environment and the story much better.
There's any other book or another project that you would like to animate next?
Well, I am developing a feature film with Lupus Films. I have co-written a script for it, and it's based upon the true life story of Kiki de Montparnasse, who was the model for Man Ray during the 1920s in Paris. And she had a very exciting life story. That is a real project that could happen as soon as next year if it all goes well. It's based on a real story. I remember Ollie Johnson from the 9 Old Men of Disney. I think he said, don't just look at animation, look at real life and try to live a bit. Look at ballet, look at art, so that you're not just referencing contemporary animation, but you're actually getting inspiration from real life as well. Bring conviction and something new into whatever you animate, so that you can then make everybody that watches the film emotional. Like at the end of KENSUKE'S Kingdom, when the two part, and as you say, the guy just needs a hug. And I think that hug is the best part of the film, where all of the film he's been desperate to get close to Michael.